"Dad, get out. You'll never see a sunset like this again," my son said on a deserted Arizona road. The second I raised my camera, his SUV sped away, leaving me in 113-degree heat without water, a wallet, or my heart pills. Hours later, I collapsed beside a cactus. A silver-haired woman jumped from a survey jeep, checked my pulse, and whispered, "Stay awake. Your son didn't leave you here by accident, and now he's made the biggest mistake of his life. I'm glad you're here for this one. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let me know what are you doing while you listen. Driving, working, or just taking a moment for yourself, I genuinely appreciate every comment you leave. A quick reminder, some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection. What truly matters is the message it carries. My son Derek looked me straight in the eyes inside his black SUV on a dirt road east of Saguaro National Park, smiled like nothing was wrong, and told me to step out for the most beautiful Sonoran sunset of the year. "Look, Dad, the most beautiful Sonoran sunset of the year," he said, gesturing toward the amber horizon. "Step out and take a few photos. I'll keep the car running with the AC on for you." At 67, I had spent 40 years drilling wells across the Sonoran Desert, understanding groundwater better than I ever understood people. I reached for my camera. Derek, 38 and CEO of a Phoenix solar company I'd believed was thriving, wore expensive sunglasses and a linen shirt. Opal, 35, and my daughter-in-law sat in the passenger seat staring at her phone. The heat hit me the moment I opened the door, 45 degrees Celsius. The red dirt road stretched empty in both directions, flanked by towering saguaro cacti. I walked about 30 meters toward a ridge where the saguaros clustered most dramatically. "Perfect light," I called back, raising my camera. That's when I heard the engine rev. I turned. The SUV was already moving, dust rising from its tires. Through the tinted rear window, I could see Opal's silhouette still looking down. Within 20 seconds, the vehicle disappeared behind the sand dunes. "Wait!" I shouted. I stood there for 2 full minutes, listening to nothing but wind through creosote bushes. Then I checked my pockets. My phone was in my hand, but Face ID wouldn't work, the sun too bright. I tried the passcode 3 times with shaking fingers before accepting I couldn't remember it. No cell service anyway. 0 bars. No wallet, no keys, no water bottle. And most critically, the shirt pocket where I placed my heart medication box every morning was empty. My reading glasses, my arthritis pills. That was all I had. "Derek," I shouted toward the direction he'd driven. Silence. I tried to remember the morning. Derek had picked me up at 6:30, said we were visiting a solar installation site, asked me to leave my wallet at home. "Easier without the bulk," he'd said. And my medication, he'd handed me my pills at breakfast personally. "Already took care of it, Dad." Then the memory surfaced, Istanbul 3 months ago. Derek had convinced me to let him hold my passport wallet to make security easier. That was the practice run. My son had planned this. You never expect betrayal to feel this quiet. No shouting, no confrontation. Just the sound of an engine fading into silence, while strangers 3 counties away are buying groceries like it's any other Tuesday. I stood there understanding that the person I'd raised had just left me to die in the desert we'd explored together when he was 8 years old. I started walking. 40 years drilling wells teaches you to read terrain. I studied the sun position 440 by its angle and identified the limestone formations that meant aquifer below. Road builders follow aquifers. The main road had to be east, maybe 2 miles. Except I was 67, not 27. I moved slowly, conserving energy, seeking shade beneath barrel cacti every 100 meters. My shirt was already soaked through. The landscape shimmered with heat distortion. I tried to produce saliva to wet my mouth, but my tongue felt thick. By 5:30, I'd covered maybe 400 meters. My legs trembled. The camera hanging from my neck felt like an anchor. At 5:45, my heart began its warning. I knew the feeling. I'd felt it twice before in my cardiologist's office during stress tests. The irregular rhythm like a drum beat with random pauses. Dr. Mitchell had been very clear. Warren, if you feel this outside the office, you sit down immediately and call emergency services. I had no phone service, no medication, no water. I lowered myself against a barrel cactus and pressed both palms against my chest. My heart skipped like a stone thrown badly across water. Beat, beat, pause, double beat, pause. Not now, I whispered. Please, not now. But the desert doesn't negotiate. I sat there as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in the exact shades Derek had promised. The most beautiful Sonoran sunset of the year. He wasn't wrong about that. The saguaros cast long shadows across the red earth. A hawk circled overhead, and I finally let myself think the thought I'd been avoiding. My son wants me to die out here. Not in anger, not in the heat of an argument. He'd planned it carefully, the remote location, the missing medication, the empty pockets, the practice run in Istanbul. This was premeditated, methodical. The work of someone who'd calculated exactly what a 67-year-old man with a heart condition could survive in 100-degree heat. The answer was not long. The sun touched the horizon, and the temperature finally began to drop, maybe to 100 degrees. My heart continued its broken rhythm. I thought about Linda, my wife, dead 3 years now from cancer. I wondered if she was waiting somewhere, if she'd forgive me for trusting our son when she'd had doubts I'd dismissed. I'm sorry, I said to the empty air. Then, at 6 o'clock, by the sun's position, I heard it, the sound of an engine. Not from the direction Derek had driven, but from the east. Then footsteps on sand, careful and measured. I didn't have the strength to stand up. I didn't even have the strength to call out. I just raised one hand palm open to the sky and waited. The woman who knelt beside me in the sand wasn't a park ranger. She was holding geological measuring equipment, and before she asked my name, she checked my pulse. Thready but steady. She said more to herself than to me. Can you hear me clearly? I nodded. Good. I'm Dagmar Stanton. I'm supervising an end-of-day groundwater survey, not conducting an emergency rescue, but you clearly need one. She was 68, silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing khaki field clothes, with the kind of sun damage that spoke to decades outdoors. Her voice was absolutely composed, the tone of someone who'd made critical decisions in worse circumstances. She turned her head and called out, Marcus, shade and water now. A man appeared within seconds, Marcus Vega, one of Dagmar's survey crew, carrying a portable shade canopy and 3 bottles of electrolyte water. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done desert rescues before snapping the canopy open above me and kneeling to help me sit upright. Small sips, Dagmar instructed as Marcus handed me the first bottle. Your body's been without for how long? Since 4:30, I managed, maybe 4. The water was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Cold, clean, real. A younger woman appeared behind Marcus, Amy Brennan, the other crew member monitoring geological sensor readings on a tablet while keeping an eye on my condition. The dual focus spoke to the strange nature of their work, half science, half survival. What are you doing out here with all that equipment? I asked between sips. Dagmar pointed toward a series of markers in the distance. I'm looking for something more valuable than gold in Arizona. Water. She studied my face. You're dehydrated, but you're not delirious. That's good. Can you stand? With Marcus's help, I got to my feet. My legs shook but held. We're 15 minutes from our field station, Dagmar said. It has AC filtered water and a cot if you need to lie down. Everything else can wait. The off-road vehicle was a modified Jeep with survey equipment strapped to the roof and geological maps spread across the back seat. Marcus drove while Amy monitored GPS coordinates, and Dagmar sat beside me watching my breathing like a doctor counting respirations. The field station turned out to be a modified shipping container with solar panels on top, tucked into a canyon that provided natural shade. Inside, air conditioning that felt like heaven, a small kitchenette computer equipment displaying real-time aquifer data, and 2 cots along the far wall. Dagmar handed me another bottle of water. "Drink half of this in the next 20 minutes? No faster?" I obeyed. The AC brought my core temperature down, and my heart gradually settled into a more regular rhythm. Dagmar busied herself with evening equipment checks, while Marcus and Amy recorded the day's survey data, their conversation full of technical terms I half recognized from my own drilling work. Permeability, recharge rates, confined aquifers. After 45 minutes, Dagmar pulled up a folding chair and sat across from me. "Can you tell me what happened now?" she asked quietly. I opened my mouth, closed it. The words felt too big, too impossible. There are moments when kindness makes you talk, and moments when it makes you shut down because you're afraid the first honest sentence will pull everything else out with it, and you're not ready to hear it all spoken aloud yet. But Dagmar waited. She didn't press. She just sat there with the patience of someone who understood that silence sometimes needs space to break. "My son left me out here," I finally said. She didn't act surprised, didn't gasp or offer empty reassurances. She just nodded once and asked, "A mistake or a plan?" I thought about the missing medication, the empty wallet, the passport in Istanbul, the careful timing. "A plan," I said. "I'm sure of it." "Why, that was the question I didn't have an answer for yet, or didn't want to face. "I don't know," I admitted. Dagmar stood and walked to a small refrigerator, pulling out 2 bottles of iced tea. She handed me one and opened hers with a practiced twist. "I should tell you something," she said. "I'm not just running a survey out here for academic interest. I own Stanton Water Resources, the largest private water conglomerate in the western United States. This isn't random kindness. This is my territory, my survey, my company." The twist landed quietly. This wasn't a chance rescue by a good Samaritan. This was a powerful woman who happened to be in the right place because she controlled it. "Why tell me that?" I asked. "Because I'm about to offer you something, and you should know who's offering it." She pulled a satellite phone from a charging dock on the desk. "I have 2 numbers I can give you right now. The U.S. consulate in Phoenix, they handle missing persons welfare checks, family disputes. Or my corporate attorney, who handles complex cases that usually involve fraud, theft, and people who thought they could get away with something." She set the phone on the small table between us. "Which one do you want to call first?" I stared at the phone. Consulate meant family services mediation, trying to understand what happened. Lawyer meant investigation evidence, preparing for something criminal. What does home even mean when the person who's supposed to protect you is the one who left you to die? "Your lawyer," I said. Dagmar's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a slight relaxation, as if I'd passed a test she hadn't announced. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said quietly. She handed me the satellite phone and recited a number from memory. As I dialed, I saw her exchange a glance with Marcus across the room, a look that said she'd seen this before, or something close enough to know exactly what was coming next. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. A professional voice. "You've reached Gregory Fletcher, elder law attorney. Leave a message." "It's after 7 on a Friday," Dagmar said. "He'll call back first thing in the morning. You can sleep here tonight if you need to." I looked at the cot along the wall. The idea of going anywhere else, going home, facing whatever Derek had done, there felt impossible. "Thank you," I said. That night I slept in the field station's spare cot, and for the first time since Linda died, I dreamed about water. I woke up on a cot in a stranger's field station, realizing I'd slept better than I had in months, and immediately felt guilty for it. Sunlight filtered through the small window above the geological maps. The air conditioning hummed quietly. Outside, I could hear Amy and Marcus packing survey equipment into the Jeep, their voices low and professional. It was just past 8 in the morning, and my body felt almost normal, hydrated, rested, no irregular heartbeat. Dagmar sat at the small desk with 2 mugs of coffee reading something on a laptop screen. "Coffee's ready," she said without looking up. "I called my attorney an hour ago. She's gathering some preliminary information, but she needs to hear from you directly." I sat up slowly, accepting the mug she handed me. The coffee was strong and black, exactly what I needed. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know." Dagmar closed the laptop and turned to face me. "But I've seen this pattern before. Not exactly like yours, but close enough to recognize it." "What pattern?" "Adult child, elderly parent. Slow accumulation of control dressed up as help." She said it without emotion, like reading survey data. The only variable is how far they're willing to go when the parent finally notices. I drank my coffee and didn't argue. She was right. "Tell me about your family," Dagmar said. "Start wherever feels right." I started with Linda. Linda, my wife of 38 years, died from pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, too quickly for either of us to prepare for what her absence would do to me. Diagnosis in February. Gone by June. 4 months between "we need to talk about treatment options" and an empty house that suddenly felt 3 times too large. The Fisher Ranch had always been ours, hers and mine. She'd chosen the kitchen tile. I'd built the barn. Together, we'd planted the oak tree by the porch that now gave shade to a swing nobody used anymore. After the funeral, I'd walk from room to room and forget why I'd entered. Derek started visiting more frequently after Linda died. At first, I was grateful. "Dad, you don't have to do this alone," he'd said at the funeral reception, his hand on my shoulder. "Let me help with the paperwork, the accounts, all of it." I'd thought he was being a good son. I thought Linda would be proud. "He started small," I told Dagmar. "Account passwords. Dad, you don't need to remember all these. Let me set up a system." Then insurance review. Estate planning. He always had reasons that sounded reasonable. Grief doesn't just hollow you out. It makes you grateful for anyone who steps into the empty space, even if you should be asking why they're so eager to fill it. "How long did this go on?" Dagmar asked. 3 years, from Linda's death until yesterday. The progression had been so gradual, I hadn't noticed the accumulation. Every visit came with a reasonable excuse. "My lawyer says this trust structure saves taxes. Just routine updates to your accounts. I'll explain each section, it's faster than reading legal jargon." And I'd said okay. Every single time I'd said okay. I remembered the dinners Derek would arrive with steaks to grill cold beer, sometimes expensive pastries from Scottsdale bakeries. We'd eat on the porch while the sun set, and he'd pull out his briefcase. "Just a few signatures, Dad, standard stuff." I'd sign. I'd always sign. "Did you read them?" Dagmar asked. "No," I admitted. He'd point to the signature lines, tell me what each document was supposed to do, and I'd trust him. He's my son. Was my son. I paused. Is my son. I don't know what tense to use anymore. Dagmar refilled my coffee without comment. The worst part was the memory surfacing now, something I'd completely forgotten until this moment. Linda used to watch me sign papers at the kitchen table. Property documents, well-drilling contracts, tax forms. She'd always check them after I finished, not because she didn't trust me, but because she said I was too quick. "Warren, your signature doesn't have brackets," she'd said once, maybe 5 years before she died. She'd pointed at a document I'd just signed. "It never has in 40 years. Look." I'd looked. My signature was a simple cursive loop, Warren Fisher, clean, no flourishes. So I'd asked. So if someone forges your signature and adds brackets or extra loops, you'd have proof it wasn't you. I'd laughed it off. Who's going to forge my signature, Linda? I drill wells. I'm not signing million-dollar deals. She'd folded the document and filed it away without another word. Now, sitting in Dagmar's field station with 6 years of hindsight, I understood what Linda had been trying to tell me. She wasn't worried about strangers forging my signature. She was worried about someone who knew me well enough to practice it. Someone who had access to every document I'd ever signed. Someone who could compare and refine until the forgery was perfect. I sat there with cold coffee and 6 years of mistakes spread out in my memory, like a map I should have read more carefully. And I understood something terrible. The person who loved me most had tried to warn me, and I'd been too proud to hear it. I thought he was taking care of me, I said to Dagmar. I didn't see I was handing over control piece by piece. Sha, that's how it works, Dagmar said quietly. They don't take it all at once. They wait until you hand it to them. Before I could respond, her satellite phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds without speaking, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite sympathy, not quite anger, something in between. My attorney needs to ask you about a dinner, Dagmar said. 8 months ago. Do you remember signing documents over dinner with your son? I remembered the dinner. Grilled steaks, cold beer, a box of expensive pastries from a Scottsdale bakery called Titus, and a leather briefcase I should never have trusted. 8 months ago, my son arrived at the ranch with a box of pastries from the most expensive bakery in Scottsdale, and a leather briefcase I should have recognized as a warning sign. It was November, the best month in Arizona. Temperatures in the 70s, clear blue sky, the kind of evening where you want to eat outside. Derek and Opal pulled up in his black SUV around 5 in the afternoon. He held the white bakery box from Titus like a peace offering. Brought your favorites, Dad, he'd said. Apple fritters and chocolate long johns. We'd grilled steaks on the porch while the sun set orange and pink over the Sonoran Desert. Cold beer. Easy conversation about nothing important, weather, football, the neighbor's new fence line. Opal sat in the chair Linda used to occupy, scrolling through her phone without contributing much. I'd thought she was just shy. After dinner, Derek opened the briefcase. Dad, just routine papers, he said, spreading documents across the patio table. Updating beneficiaries and setting up a simple trust structure. My lawyer reviewed everything, just needs your signature. I'd reached for the first page, had to be 30 pages thick, dense legal text in 8-point font. Let me read through it, I said. Dad, it's all legal jargon, Derek said, pulling the stack back slightly. I'll explain each section. It's faster. And I'd let him. Here's what I want you to understand. When someone you raised from birth sits across from you at your own dinner table, you don't see a manipulator. You see the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck after Little League practice, and that boy wouldn't lie to you, so you sign. A woman I didn't recognize appeared from Derek's SUV halfway through the signing process. Dad, this is Monica. She's a notary public. Friend of mine from the business community. She happened to be in the area, which happened to be in the middle of the desert at 7:30 on a Tuesday night. But I'd smiled and nodded, while Monica notarized my signatures on documents I hadn't read, only half listened to Derek's explanations about. Opal never said a word the entire evening. When they left around 9, I'd stood on the porch watching the SUV's taillights disappear and thought about how lucky I was to have a son who cared enough to handle complicated paperwork so I wouldn't have to. Now sitting in Dagmar's field station with the memory fresh and bitter, I understood what that dinner actually was. A staged operation with props, a convenient notary, and a target who trusted too much. I signed, I told Dagmar, everything he put in front of me. Her laptop screen lit up with an incoming video call. Sarah Pemberton Dagmar's corporate attorney appeared on screen, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses and the methodical efficiency of someone who'd seen fraud patterns before. Mr. Fisher, she said, without preamble. I've reviewed the documents filed with Maricopa County. You signed a durable financial power of attorney 8 months ago. It became effective immediately, not upon incapacity, as you might have assumed. That means your son gained immediate legal authority over your financial accounts the day you signed. The words landed like physical blows. How immediate? I asked. That same week, he filed a $320,000 mortgage against the structure listed as Equipment Barn on your property. The barn. I felt the blood drain from my face. What's in the barn? Dagmar asked, watching my reaction. 40 years of drilling equipment, I said slowly. And a groundwater detection device I designed. It's a registered patent. I never sold it commercially, used it for my own work. I didn't think anyone knew it had value. Sarah Pemberton's expression shifted slightly. What kind of value are we talking about? I don't know. 2 million more. It's proprietary technology for detecting aquifer depth in limestone desert terrain. Oil and gas companies have asked about it, but I never wanted to sell. That barn held more than equipment. It held every innovation I'd refined over 4 decades. The kind of practical genius that doesn't make headlines but solves real problems. And my son had mortgaged it like it was just another storage shed. Before Sarah could respond, my satellite phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized: Sherman Yates, my best friend for 40 years, and a retired real estate attorney. I answered on speaker. Warren, I'm at your ranch. Sherman said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that told me he'd found something I wasn't going to like. The barn locks, they've been changed. I've got the locksmith receipt right here on the workbench. Your son ordered it 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before he left me in the desert. He locked me out of my own barn, I said. Not just locked you out, Sherman continued. He installed commercial-grade deadbolts, the kind you use on bank vaults, not tool sheds. Whatever's in there, he wanted to make damn sure you couldn't access it. Dagmar and I exchanged glances. The pieces were assembling into a picture I didn't want to see clearly yet. Sherman, stay there, I said. Don't touch anything else. I'll call you back. On the laptop screen, Sarah Pemberton had pulled up additional documents, her eyes scanning rapidly. Mr. Fisher, she said quietly. There's another account I need to check. Can I call you back in 20 minutes? The way she said another account, careful, precise, like she was already calculating damage, made my stomach drop. What account? I asked. I'd rather confirm before I say. 20 minutes. The video call ended. The satellite phone went quiet after Sarah Pemberton hung up. Dagmar sat across from me, coffee cooling between her hands, and I could see her doing the mental math I was doing. If the POA was immediate and the barn was mortgaged 6 months ago, what else had happened in the 8 months since that dinner? 20 minutes felt like an eternity. 20 minutes later, when the satellite phone rang, I already knew the number Sarah Pemberton was about to say would be worse than I'd imagined. I just didn't know how much worse. Dagmar put the call on speaker. Sarah's voice filled the small field station, precise and deliberate. Mr. Fisher, I found 2 withdrawals from your retirement account. $640,000 total. February and March of this year. The funds were transferred into a limited liability company registered in Delaware called Brooks Solar Ventures. Your son is the sole member. $640,000. I sat there unable to speak, while my brain tried to process numbers that had taken me 40 years to accumulate. Not under the power of attorney, you signed, Sarah continued. Technically, you authorized the creation of the LLC and the transfer of funds. Technically, Dagmar said quietly, the single word carrying an ocean of contempt for legal technicalities. Delaware. I finally managed. Why Delaware? Job privacy, Sarah explained. Delaware LLCs don't require public disclosure of members or financial activities. If your son wanted to obscure the money trail, that's where you do it. This wasn't opportunistic theft, Mr. Fisher. This was planned. Here's what $640,000 means. When you're 67, it's not just money, it's every Saturday morning. You got up at 5 to make the route on time every Christmas. You worked overtime every year. You didn't take the vacation because the bills needed paying, all of it converted into numbers on a screen that suddenly read 0. Is there more? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Sarah paused. Yes. There's a home equity line of credit filed against your primary property 4 months ago. $1.8 million. The ranch. My grandfather had homesteaded that land in 1947, built the first house with his own hands using lumber from a demolished mining camp. My father expanded it, added the barn and the well house. I'd raised Derek there. 240 acres of desert and limestone that held 3 generations of Fisher family history. I didn't sign that, I said. Sarah's voice remained carefully neutral. There's a signature on the document. I didn't ask if there's a signature, I said. I asked, did I sign it? Dagmar placed her hand over mine on the desk. Said nothing. Sometimes silence is all that makes sense when the ground falls out from under someone. Sarah pulled up a document on her laptop screen, adjusting the video feed so I could see it clearly. Mr. Fisher, we need to compare this signature against your other signature samples. If there are discrepancies in pen pressure, slant angle, or stroke pattern, this could be forgery. I leaned close to Dagmar's laptop screen, studying the signature line on the mortgage document, and I saw it immediately. It has brackets, I said quietly. What? Dagmar asked. My signature. Look. I pointed at the screen. The signature read, W. Aaron F. Isher, with small brackets around the capital W and F. My signature doesn't have brackets. Never has. Not in 67 years. Dagmar leaned in, studying the image. You're absolutely certain. I thought about Linda watching me sign documents at the kitchen table for 38 years of marriage. I thought about her observation that I dismissed as trivial when she'd mentioned it. I thought about every check I'd written, every contract I'd signed, every piece of paper that carried my legal name in my own handwriting. I'm surer than anything I've ever been sure of, I said. On the laptop screen, Sarah Pemberton had stopped typing. She looked up at the camera. Mr. Fisher, if that signature isn't yours, we're not talking about power of attorney abuse anymore. We're talking about forgery. That's criminal fraud under Arizona law. A signature is supposed to be as unique as a fingerprint, as unchangeable as DNA. The one mark that proves you agreed, you knew you chose, and mine had been copied by someone who'd watched me sign permission slips and birthday cards for 38 years. Can you prove it? I asked. That it's forged. Sticky. We'll need a forensic document examiner, Sarah said. They'll analyze pen pressure, stroke, velocity, tremor patterns. But if you're certain about the brackets, that's a distinctive difference a jury can see without expert testimony. That's powerful. Dagmar pulled up another window on her laptop, searching something. How many documents would he have needed to forge? That depends on what we find, Sarah said. The POA you actually signed gave him authority over some accounts. But the ranch mortgage, the barn loan, if those signatures are forged, he went beyond the authority you granted. That's a different level of criminal intent. My son hadn't just betrayed my trust. He'd studied my handwriting for 4 decades, practiced forging my signature, and then used it to steal everything I owned. The desert abandonment wasn't the crime, it was the cleanup operation. Get rid of the witness before he figures out what's been taken. What else can we check? I asked. Everything, Sarah said. Every account, every loan, every document filed in your name over the past 8 months. But I need to ask you something else." She paused. In cases like this, the perpetrator often begins managing the victim's reputation before the financial crimes are fully executed. Have you noticed your son telling anyone, neighbors, friends, medical professionals, that you've been experiencing memory problems or confusion? I thought about my neighbor, Rowena Cruz, who'd lived across the street for 30 years and never missed a detail. Sharp eyes, sharper memory. If Derek had been telling people I was losing my mind, Rowena would have noticed. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know someone who would." The evening I was fighting to stay alive in the desert. My son pulled into his driveway in Scottsdale, saw our neighbor Rowena Cruz watering her roses, and rolled down his window to tell her a story. I learned this later from Sherman, but I'm telling it now because timing matters. It was 7:52 p.m. on a Wednesday. Rowena Cruz, 78, and retired from Maricopa County Court after 30 years, as a clerk stood on her front lawn with a garden hose watering the roses she'd tended since 1995. Derek's black SUV pulled into the driveway across the street, my driveway, though I wouldn't see it for 3 more days. He rolled down his window. Mrs. Cruz," he called out, voice carrying just the right note of concern. "Have you seen my father today?" Rowena turned off the water and walked closer. "No, honey. Is everything all right?" "His dementia is getting worse," Derek said, shaking his head with what probably looked like genuine worry. "Today he wandered off on his own during a trip. We're looking for him now." Rowena made the appropriate sympathetic sounds. "Oh my. I hope you find him soon." "We will," Derek assured her. "Just wanted to check if he'd somehow made it home." He drove into the garage. Rowena returned to her roses. But here's what Derek didn't know about Rowena Cruz. 30 years of recording court proceedings had given her a habit she couldn't break even in retirement. She kept notebooks. Small, spiral-bound ones she bought in packs of 12 from Office Depot, and she wrote down anything that seemed worth remembering. That evening, after Derek's garage door closed, Rowena went inside and opened the notebook she kept on her kitchen counter. She wrote, 7:52 p.m. Wednesday. Derek says Dad confused wandered off during trip. Searching now. Slight alcohol smell from car when he rolled window down. People who lie usually provide too many details. Nobody asked for Rowena had learned that in 30 years of court transcription. And it's why she wrote down everything Derek said, even though he was just a neighbor's son she'd watched grow up. The alcohol smell was important. It meant Derek had driven straight from wherever he'd left me, straight from the desert, where I was sitting against a cactus with my heart failing, and come home to establish his alibi while I was still in danger. 2 days later, I learned all this when Sherman told me. But first, I had to come home. Day 3 morning. Dagmar drove me from the field station back to Fisher Ranch in her survey Jeep. The 2-hour drive passed in relative silence, the kind of quiet that comes from having said all the urgent things and knowing the hard work was just beginning. Sherman's old pickup truck sat in my driveway when we arrived. He stood in the yard, hands in his pockets, looking at the barn like he was calculating something. When he heard the Jeep, he turned. He didn't say hello. Didn't ask how I was feeling or comment on the fact that I'd been missing for 2 days. He just walked over, shook my hand, and held it a second longer than usual. That was Sherman, 40 years of friendship condensed into gestures that said everything words couldn't. "I walked around the barn," he said. "Locks have been changed." "When?" I asked. "According to the locksmith receipt 3 weeks ago." He handed me a folded piece of paper. "Ordered by your son." I unfolded it. There, in black and white commercial deadbolt installation billed to Derek Fisher, dated 3 weeks before he left me in the desert. 3 weeks before he left me to die, I said quietly. "Exactly," Sherman confirmed. "That's the thing about real friendship. After 40 years, you don't need to explain why you're standing in someone's driveway at 8 in the morning, holding a locksmith receipt, like evidence at a crime scene. You just do it, and they know why, and that's enough. Sherman looked at Dagmar standing beside me, then back at me, then at Dagmar again. His expression shifted slightly, not suspicious, not protective, just genuinely curious. "Who is this Lady Warren?" he asked. It was such a normal question, so completely ordinary in the middle of everything falling apart, that I felt something crack in my chest. I smiled. "First time in 3 days. The woman who saved my life," I said. Dagmar extended her hand. "Dagmar Stanton. I was conducting a water survey when I found Warren. Sherman Yates," he said, shaking her hand with both of his. "Warren's friend for 40 years. Thank you for being in the right place." "I'm glad I was," Dagmar said simply. Sherman released her hand and looked at me again, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen before, approval mixed with relief. Like he'd been worried about me being alone for too long, and here was evidence I might not have to be. Then his expression shifted back to business. There's something else," he said, pulling a second piece of paper from his pocket. "I talked to your neighbor, Rowena. You remember her lives across the street used to be a court clerk." "I remember," I said. "She wants to know if you need her notebook." I looked at him. "Her notebook." Sherman's expression carried grim satisfaction. 30 years as a court clerk. She writes down everything, including what your son told her the night you disappeared. Time-stamped, verbatim quotes, and observations. "What kind of observations?" Dagmar asked. "The kind that place your son at home at 7:52 p.m. the night he abandoned Warren in the desert," Sherman said. "The kind that note he smelled like alcohol when he rolled down his car window. The kind a prosecutor might find very interesting when building a timeline." By afternoon, my ranch dining table, where Linda used to host Thanksgiving dinners for 30 years, had become a field office covered in legal documents, laptops, and coffee cups that nobody remembered to drink. Sherman sat at one end, going through Rowena's notebook page by page, occasionally reading entries aloud. Dagmar worked on her laptop, coordinating with Sarah Pemberton, and I sat in the middle watching the ceiling fan turn, thinking about how 3 days ago my biggest concern had been whether to replace the water heater before winter. The video call chime interrupted at 2:15. Gregory Fletcher appeared on Dagmar's laptop screen, an elder law attorney, specializing in Arizona ARS 46451 financial exploitation cases, with the measured demeanor of someone who'd prosecuted these crimes before. He wore reading glasses and had a legal pad covered in notes. "Mr. Fisher," he said without preamble, "I've reviewed the documentation Sarah sent over. Under Arizona law, we're looking at 4 distinct violations. 2 civil, 2 potentially criminal, with felony classifications." Sherman stopped reading. Dagmar turned her laptop so I could see the screen more clearly. Fletcher continued in that deliberate attorney cadence. "First power of attorney executed beyond fiduciary duty. Civil claim under ARS 46456. Second, the retirement account withdrawals not made for the beneficiary's benefit. Breach of fiduciary duty. Third, if the mortgage signature is confirmed as forged, that's a Class 4 felony under ARS 13-2001 plus potential federal bank fraud charges. Fourth," he paused, looking at me through the screen. "Fourth is the desert abandonment. Knowingly placing a vulnerable adult in a situation creating substantial risk of death or serious physical injury. That qualifies as endangerment Class 6 felony under ARS 13-1201. "Rest in time," Sherman said quietly. Fletcher nodded. "If criminal charges are filed and convictions secured, yes. Class 4 felony carries 1.5 to 3 years. Class 6 carries 0.5 to 1.5 years. Sentences could run consecutively." I sat there doing the math. My son could go to prison for up to 4.5 years. That's a possibility the state will determine, not you," Fletcher added, reading my expression. "Your role is to provide accurate testimony. The prosecutor decides charges. The jury decides guilt. The judge decides sentencing. How do you reconcile loving someone with holding them accountable, especially when accountability might mean watching them led away in handcuffs? Knowing you could have stayed silent, but chose not to. I looked out the window at Linda's apple tree, still standing after 20 years. She'd planted it the year Derek turned 18. Said every mother should plant something that outlives her attention span. "Is Opal implicated?" I asked. Silence on the call. Sherman looked up from the notebook. Dagmar stopped typing. Fletcher removed his reading glasses. "Depends on what she knew and when she knew it. If she was aware of the fraud and participated, yes, she could face charges as an accessory. If she has evidence and chooses to provide it voluntarily that demonstrates lack of criminal intent and cooperation with investigation, that's a key factor in her favor. In that case," I said, "we need to talk to her before doing anything else." Sherman nodded slowly. Dagmar's expression was harder to read, but she didn't argue. Fletcher agreed to wait 48 hours before filing anything official. That gave me 2 days to find out what Opal knew. That evening, after Sherman left and Dagmar settled into the guest room, Linda used to keep ready for visitors who never came. I stepped onto the back porch alone. The sun had set an hour ago. Desert air carried that particular coolness that only comes after the land releases the day's heat. I pulled out the borrowed phone Dagmar had given me. My own was still somewhere in Derek's SUV or thrown in a dumpster, and dialed Opal's number. 3 rings, then Dad. The single word carried everything: relief, guilt, fear, confusion. "Opal, huh?" I said. Silence. Then, "You're alive." "I am." I heard her breathing change the small hitch that comes right before crying. Then she was crying real tears I recognized immediately, not performance. I'd heard enough crying in my life to know the difference between manipulation and genuine remorse. These were the kind that come from realizing you married someone you didn't actually know, and now you have to choose between loyalty and truth. "I didn't know he was going to do that," she said between sobs. "I swear, Dad, I didn't know he was going to leave you out there." "I know you didn't know right then," I said carefully. "But I think you suspected something was wrong before that. Didn't you?" Long pause. More crying. Then quietly, "Yes." "How long?" 2 months. Maybe 3. I found something on the office server. Financial transfers that didn't make sense. I asked him about it, and he said it was complex tax planning you'd authorized. But the way he said it..." Her voice broke. I knew he was lying. I just didn't know what he was lying about. "What did you find, Opal?" "Emails. Metadata. Security footage from the office showing him alone editing documents after hours. All backed up automatically to the company server because he forgot we have cloud redundancy." My heart was beating faster. "Do you still have access to it?" "I downloaded everything to a USB drive. I didn't know what to do with it. I thought about calling you, but..." She stopped. I was afraid. Of him. Of what it meant. Of being wrong. I looked through the window at the dining room, where Dagmar sat reading something on her laptop. The woman who'd saved my life was sleeping in my guest room. My best friend had spent the day documenting evidence, and my daughter-in-law was on the phone confessing she'd been gathering proof against her own husband. "Opal," I said, "do you want to do the right thing?" Long pause. I could hear her breathing. Then, "Yes." I hung up and stood on the porch for another 20 minutes listening to crickets. Inside, I could hear Sherman and Dagmar talking in low voices about something. I thought Opal said she found something on the office server. That means evidence. Digital evidence. the kind that doesn't lie. Opal Fisher walked into Gregory Fletcher's Phoenix office at 8 in the morning, carrying a USB drive, a folder of printed emails, and the kind of quiet determination that comes from knowing your marriage is about to end, but doing it anyway. I learned this later from Gregory's account, but the sequence matters. She'd driven herself. No attorney, no husband, just herself and the evidence she'd been compiling for 3 months, without fully admitting to herself why she was doing it. Gregory offered coffee. She declined, sat down in the leather chair across from his desk and placed the USB drive between them like a confession. "I'm the CFO of Brooks Solar Ventures," she said. I should have asked more questions. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. The USB contained 3 things that would change everything. First, the power of attorney document revision history. The metadata showed the file was opened and edited 11 days after the signature date Warren had provided, tracked directly to Derek Fisher's office computer login credentials, time-stamped, undeniable. Second, office security camera footage from their building's automated backup system. 15 minutes of Derek sitting alone at his desk at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, opening the file, making changes, saving. The timestamp matched the metadata exactly. Third, an internal email chain where Derek had asked Opal technical accounting questions about classifying family source funds for tax optimization. Questions she'd answered professionally without understanding she was providing cover for theft. "This metadata is time-stamped evidence," Gregory told her. "The file was modified after your father-in-law signed it. That's deliberate post-signature alteration." Opal had nodded. "I brought the security footage too. You can see him doing it, alone, at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. It takes a particular kind of courage to walk into a lawyer's office with evidence that will destroy your husband's freedom, knowing you'll be the prosecution's star witness, knowing every mutual friend will ask why you didn't just stay quiet and loyal like a good wife should." Gregory called me at 10:15 that morning. I was standing in the kitchen watching Sherman replace the coffee filter we'd forgotten to change since yesterday. Dagmar sat at the table reviewing something on her laptop. "Mr. Fisher," Gregory said when I answered, "your daughter-in-law's evidence is sufficient to upgrade charges to the federal level. The metadata doesn't lie. Post-signature document alteration constitutes wire fraud under federal statute." I sat down slowly in the chair Linda used to occupy. "There's something else," Gregory continued. "During our investigation, we found 2 other investors in your son's solar project. Both have signature irregularities on their investment documents. Same pattern. You're not the only victim." The kitchen went quiet. Sherman had stopped moving. Dagmar looked up from her laptop. "How much did they lose?" I asked. "Combined approximately $180,000. Smaller amounts than yours, but identical methods. Forged signatures authorizing fund transfers. This isn't isolated family exploitation, Mr. Fisher. This is pattern fraud, federal wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1343 and bank fraud under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1344. My son hadn't just betrayed me. He'd built a system. What happens now?" I asked. "I'm preparing a referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. They'll likely open a formal investigation within a week. With the evidence Mrs. Fisher provided, plus the forensic signature analysis, plus the pattern across multiple victims, this becomes a prosecutable federal case." I thanked him and hung up. Sherman poured coffee nobody would drink. Dagmar closed her laptop. That afternoon, she asked if we could talk privately. Sherman took the hint and went outside to check the barn locks again. Though we all knew they hadn't magically changed back. Dagmar sat across from me at the dining table with an expression I hadn't seen before, somewhere between apology and strategic assessment. "Warren," she said, "I need to tell you something about your son's project. My company has been in due diligence to acquire part of it. I looked at her. What? Stanton Water Resources. We've been evaluating acquisition of the water efficiency division of Brooks Solar Ventures as part of our renewable energy expansion. I knew about the project months before I found you in the desert. The room felt smaller suddenly. You knew about Derek's company before you met me? I asked carefully. Yes, she said. I didn't know you were connected until Gregory cross-referenced names during the investigation. The project file listed the CEO as Derek Fisher. I never saw your name in the documentation. Sherman came back inside at exactly the wrong moment, heard the tail end, and stopped in the doorway. So you have the power to, he started, you to decide whether that project survives or fails. Dagmar finished. Yes. Was it coincidence that the woman who rescued me from the desert also happened to be evaluating my son's business project, or do we only call things coincidence when we don't want to acknowledge that the universe has a pattern? We're just starting to see the acquisition, I said slowly. What happens to it now? Dagmar met my eyes. Pending federal investigation. The deal is suspended indefinitely. Even if charges aren't filed, the due diligence uncovered sufficient irregularities to kill the transaction. Your son's project was already financially unstable. This will likely force bankruptcy. Sherman sat down heavily in the chair beside me. You saved his life, he said to Dagmar, and now I'm running a business, Dagmar said quietly. I don't acquire companies run by people under federal investigation for fraud. That's not revenge. That's fiduciary responsibility to my shareholders. She was right, but it didn't make the irony any less sharp. Dagmar opened her laptop and pulled up a geological survey map I recognized immediately, the Sonoran Desert east of Saguaro National Park, with coordinates marked in red. "To Warren," she said quietly. "I need to show you something about where we found you. The exact coordinates. Do you know why my team was surveying that specific location?" I stared at the red coordinates on Dagmar's geological survey map, and she answered her own question before I could. We were surveying that location because it's the deepest groundwater point in the entire sector, she said. 340 feet down to the aquifer. We patrol this route 3 times a week on a fixed schedule. The number hit me like a physical blow. 340 feet. I drilled that depth 15 years ago, documented it in reports Dagmar's company would have reviewed during any professional survey of the region. My son chose the spot furthest from the road, I said slowly. The most lethal location in the entire zone, which happened to be our most frequently patrolled survey point. Dagmar finished. He picked the worst possible place to abandon you, which turned out to be the best possible place to be rescued. The irony was so precise it felt like something other than coincidence. That conversation happened on day 4, late afternoon. By day 5, the irony had company. 7 in the morning, my borrowed phone rang with Derek's name on the caller ID, and I had to decide whether to answer. I didn't. Let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. This time I picked up. Sherman and Dagmar, having coffee in the kitchen, went quiet. "Dad." Derek said, voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured concern I'd heard 1,000 times. "Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you for days." 5 days ago, I said, voice flat and cold, you left me in a 45-degree desert without water or heart medication. Silence on the line. "About that day," he started. "Dad, I need to explain." "No," I said and hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I declined the call. It rang twice more. I let them go to voicemail. Then a text message appeared. "Dad, don't let strangers decide our family business." I read it twice, then took a screenshot and forwarded it to Gregory Fletcher with a single line, "Exhibit a defendant attempting contact with victim." Here's what you need to understand about people who commit calculated crimes. They genuinely believe they can negotiate their way out afterward, as if the evidence gathering and legal machinery can be stopped with the right combination of apology and pressure, as if "I'm sorry" erases "I planned this." Derek still thought this was a family dispute that could be resolved over dinner and expensive pastries. He had no idea Opal had already provided federal evidence that 2 other victims had been identified, that forensic document analysis was underway, that his attempted negotiation was now preserved as evidence of witness tampering. Sherman poured me fresh coffee I didn't want. Dagmar returned to the dining table with her laptop and the geological survey maps spread across the surface where Linda used to set Thanksgiving dinner. "Show me again," I said, sitting down across from her. She pulled up the digital version on her laptop, overlaying the rescue coordinates with topographical data. The red marker sat in a depression between 2 limestone formations, the kind of geography that creates natural aquifer concentration. "Furthest point from the road in the entire survey sector," she said, tracing the route with her finger. "Approximately 2.3 miles from the nearest access point. In July heat without water for someone your age with a heart condition, just lethal within 6 hours. I finished. I know. 40 years of desert work taught me exactly how dangerous that zone is. And you taught your son," Dagmar said quietly. "I did. So he knew what he was doing when he chose this spot. He knew I confirmed." Dagmar zoomed in on the map. "But here's what he didn't know. This depression, this specific geological formation, is exactly why we survey here. Deepest water table in the region. Our team has standing orders to check this location every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday during active survey season." "What day did he leave me there?" I asked, though I already knew. "Wednesday," Dagmar said. "July 19th, Wednesday afternoon. Fate doesn't announce itself with trumpets and signs from heaven. It shows up as overlapping circles on a geological survey map, as patrol schedules that happened to align with abandonment timing, as rescue emerging from the exact mathematics of lethality. The spot he thought would kill me fastest," I said, "was the spot where rescue was most certain. Within a 2-hour window," Dagmar confirmed. "We found you at 6 p.m. Our team finishes that sector between 5:30 and 6:30 every Wednesday without fail." Sherman, who'd been listening from the kitchen doorway, let out a long breath. "Your son miscalculated. Spectacularly," Dagmar agreed. She studied the map more closely, zooming out to show a wider view of the region. A cluster of small markers appeared west of the rescue coordinates. Well markers, the kind used to document drilling sites. "Warren," she said slowly, "I need to ask you something about your professional history. Which year did you drill wells in this specific zone? Be as precise as you can remember." I leaned forward, studying the coordinates. The markers were mine. I recognized the cluster pattern immediately. 15 years ago, I said. Maybe 16. We hit aquifer at 340 feet. I remember because it was deeper than standard limestone formation predictions. We documented it as an anomaly. "You documented it." Dagmar repeated, her expression shifting to something I couldn't quite read. "Full survey report." I confirmed. "Filed with county records. Standard procedure for commercial drilling operations." Dagmar's finger traced the coordinates on the map, then moved west to the cluster of well markers I'd placed there myself. She looked at me with an expression of recognition that felt too specific to be casual curiosity. "Warren," she said quietly, "do you remember who tried to buy your company 15 years ago? Who made you an offer for your well drilling operation and all associated intellectual property?" I looked at her face and understood before she said it. 15 years ago, when Dagmar's conglomerate offered me $2.3 million for my well drilling company, and I said no, I never imagined that decision would one day save my life. You were the buyer, I said, the pieces falling into place. Stanton Water Resources. You made the offer, and I turned it down because I wanted to keep the company independent. I wanted it to eventually go to Derek. See, best company I never bought, Dagmar said with a slight smile. You ran a tight operation. Professional documentation, innovative techniques, excellent safety record. I would have paid more if you'd been willing to negotiate. I thought you'd be angry I rejected your offer, I admitted. No, I was impressed, she said. Most people take the money. You took principles. That's rare. Linda had supported that decision. I remembered the conversation at the kitchen table, her hand on mine. Keep it, she'd said. Build something Derek can inherit. Money runs out, but legacy doesn't. We'd been so certain we were making the right choice. Business is business, Warren. Dagmar continued, her voice carrying absolute clarity. I make offers. People accept or decline. That's professional. But leaving someone to die in the desert, that's not business. That's cruelty. I can tell the difference. Sherman appeared in the doorway with fresh coffee neither of us would drink. He'd been listening. So you hold no grudge, he said to Dagmar. 15 years later, multi-million-dollar deal rejected, and you saved the man who turned you down. No grudge, Dagmar confirmed. I respect people who know what they value. Then it hit me the full scope of Derek's miscalculation. He knew, I said slowly. Derek knew about your offer. I told him the story years ago, using it as a lesson about staying independent, about not selling out to corporate interests. He knew you'd tried to buy my company. Dagmar's expression shifted. And he assumed what? That you'd resent me for rejecting you, I finished. That old business rivalry meant you'd ignore me if you found me in trouble. He calculated that abandoning me near your survey territory was safe because you'd leave me there out of competitive resentment. The silence in the room was thick. He fundamentally misunderstood the difference between professional competition and human decency. Dagmar said quietly, there's a difference between business competition and human decency that sociopaths never understand. They assume everyone operates on pure self-interest, that yesterday's rejected offer means today's callous indifference. But that's not how people with actual principles work. Sherman set down his coffee mug with more force than necessary. Your son thought he was smart. Turns out he was just cruel and wrong. He built his entire plan on a fundamental misreading of human nature, I said. He thought professional rivalry overrides basic morality, which is exactly the kind of thinking that leads to federal prosecution, Dagmar added. Before I tell you what the forensic analyst found in that signature, are you still with me? Comment A. If you think Derek planned everything from the start, or B, if you think he improvised as things fell apart, and add one short reason, so I can see how you're reading this. Please note the next part includes some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. The next morning, Day 6, Sherman arrived at 7:30 carrying Rowena Cruz's spiral notebook like it was evidence at trial. Which technically it would be. She kept 6 months of entries, he said, spreading the notebook open on the dining table. Date, times, visitor descriptions, everything. I leaned over to read Rowena's precise handwriting. February 13, 10:45 a.m., Derek plus man with briefcase notary. Stayed 22 minutes. Warren didn't walk them out. Sarch 8th, 11:20 a.m., same notary-looking man. White bakery box, visible Titus Bakery logo, 25 minutes. To April Sooth, 2:15 p.m., Derek alone carrying folder. Left after 18 minutes. Warren on porch afterward looking confused. 3 visits. 3 signing sessions I barely remembered. all documented by a retired court clerk who couldn't turn off 30 years of habit. She wrote down everything, I said. My phone rang. Gregory Fletcher. Mr. Fisher, he said without preamble. Forensic handwriting analysis is complete. The ranch mortgage signature is definitively forged. Different pen pressure stroke angle analysis confirms variance from your authentic signature samples. And the brackets you mentioned present in the question signature absent in all your known signatures over 40 years. It's conclusive. I felt something settle in my chest, not satisfaction exactly, but grim confirmation. There's one more thing, Gregory continued. Your son retained a criminal defense attorney this morning. Martin Holbrook from Phoenix. Former federal prosecutor, now defense counsel specializing in white-collar crime. He knows what's coming. When someone hires a criminal defense lawyer before they've been formally charged, they're telling you everything you need to know. They're not preparing to prove innocence. They're preparing to minimize consequences they know are deserved. So it's real, I said. Federal charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office will likely file within 2 weeks. Gregory confirmed. Wire fraud, bank fraud, elder financial exploitation. With the forensic evidence, Opal's testimony, the pattern across multiple victims, this is a prosecutable case. I thanked him and hung up. Dagmar had been listening from across the table. She looked at me for a long moment, then at Sherman. There's something else Warren needs to see, she said. In the barn. Sherman raised an eyebrow. The barn's locked. Derek changed the locks 3 weeks ago, remember? Dagmar smiled slightly. I had a locksmith come yesterday afternoon while you were both occupied. The lock is replaced. Time to see what he was protecting. The barn smelled exactly as I remembered, motor oil dust and 40 years of desert heat baked into metal and wood. But the lock on the door was new, installed by Dagmar's locksmith, while I'd been occupied with lawyers and evidence. Dagmar pushed the door open. Afternoon light streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. The space looked exactly as I'd left it 3 weeks before Derek changed the lock's drill bits, organized by size on wall-mounted racks, measuring rods standing in the corner, like steel sentinels calibration tools, arranged on workbenches with the obsessive precision of someone who'd spent 4 decades trying not to lose small parts in desert sand. Everything was covered in fine Arizona dust, that particular reddish-brown powder that gets into every crevice and reminds you the desert always wins eventually. Dagmar walked slowly through the machinery with a trained eye, pausing at each station to examine equipment I'd maintained religiously even after I'd stopped taking regular drilling contracts. Her fingers traced the edge of a laser level. She studied a ground-penetrating radar unit that was probably worth more than my first truck. Then she stopped in the far corner beside a small device that most people would dismiss as just another piece of dusty equipment. "What's this?" she asked. I walked over and looked at the machine I'd built and refined over 15 years. It didn't look impressive, just a metal box with sensors attached about the size of a microwave, covered in the same reddish dust as everything else. Groundwater detection tool I designed, I said. Refined it over 15 years for desert limestone formations. More accurate than the commercial devices that were available when I was actively drilling. Dagmar knelt down, examining it more closely. You registered the patent? Yeah. Paid the maintenance fees every year out of habit. Never sold it commercially. Figured it was too specialized, too niche for the market. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the device from multiple angles. Then she stood and met my eyes with an expression I couldn't quite read. Warren, direct question. Do you know what this patent is worth? I shrugged. Never really thought about it. Maybe $50,000 if someone wanted specialized equipment for desert drilling. Try 2 to 3 million, she said quietly. The drought survey technology market has exploded in the last 5 years. Climate change, water scarcity, increasing demand for accurate aquifer mapping. This design solves problems people are paying premium prices to fix. I looked at the dusty machine in the corner. $2 to $3 million. Greed works like tunnel vision. You become so focused on the obvious pile of gold coins that you walk right past the diamond, lying in the dust, dismissing it as worthless rock, because it doesn't glitter the way you expect wealth to shine. My son mortgaged this barn, I said slowly, the irony settling over me like the dust in the air. If he'd succeeded in taking the property, he'd have gotten the building, but I would have kept the patent. Exactly, Dagmar confirmed. The barn is worth the mortgage amount, approximately $1.8 million. But this device, once properly validated and brought to market, could be worth more than the entire ranch. He was so focused on real estate and retirement accounts that he completely missed the most valuable asset you own. Sherman, who'd been standing in the doorway listening, let out a long breath. Your son mortgaged the treasure chest and left the treasure sitting in the corner collecting dust. That's one way to look at it, Dagmar said. We stood there in the barn for another 20 minutes, while Dagmar took photos and measurements, her mind clearly already working through valuation and market analysis. Then we locked up and returned to the house. The next morning, day 7, I found Dagmar on the front porch at sunrise with coffee, watching the sky turn from purple to orange over the Sonoran Desert. I poured my own cup and sat in the chair Linda used to occupy. I've decided something, Dagmar said without looking at me. I'm attending your son's investor pitch in October as the lead prospective investor. It's the only way to present the evidence before the entire board simultaneously. You're going to expose him in front of his investors, I said. I'm going to give them the information they need to make informed decisions about who they're doing business with, she corrected. There's a difference. I nodded, understanding the distinction. Dagmar was quiet for another moment, then said something I wasn't expecting. Warren, do you remember testifying in Epcor versus Southwest Water Group 2022 Maricopa County Superior Court? I searched my memory. Expert witness testimony about aquifer depletion patterns. Yeah. Some lawyer called me, said they needed someone who understood limestone formations. I waited outside the courtroom reading a newspaper, testified for 20 minutes, and went home. I was the defendant, Dagmar said quietly. Southwest Water Group. Your testimony about sustainable aquifer management helped us win that case. Court records list you as witness Brooks, your middle name. You sat outside that courtroom and never looked up to see who you were helping. We moved through the world, dropping small acts of competence and kindness, like breadcrumbs, never knowing which ones will matter, never tracking who we help. And then years later, someone appears in the desert holding water because you once spent 20 minutes in a courtroom telling the truth about aquifers. Why didn't you mention it sooner? I asked. Because then you didn't need to know, she said, still looking toward the horizon. Now is different. I understood. 3 years ago, I'd done a job professionally without agenda or favor. Now she was doing the same for me. Not because she owed me, but because that's how people with principles operate. Dagmar stood to leave, then paused at the porch steps. Warren, the investor pitch is scheduled for October, 3 months from now. That gives us time to prepare, but it also means deciding, do you want to be there when it happens? You don't have to. The evidence speaks for itself. I watched the sun climb higher over the desert, thinking about the barn full of equipment, the patent worth millions, the son who'd tried to take everything while missing the actual treasure. I need to be there, I said. Not for revenge, to close the door. 3 months passed between my decision to attend the investor pitch and the Wednesday afternoon we gathered at my ranch to finalize the strategy. 3 months that felt simultaneously like 3 years and 3 minutes. October in Arizona brought relief from the brutal summer heat. The temperature had dropped to a reasonable 85 degrees, and the desert had that particular golden quality that makes you forget it tried to kill you a season ago. Gregory Fletcher appeared on Dagmar's laptop screen at 2 o'clock sharp, legal pad in hand, reviewing the operational plan one final time. Mrs. Stanton attends as the lead prospective investor from Stanton Water Resources. He said, ticking off points. Sarah Pemberton presents the forensic document analysis before any signing occurs. Mrs. Opal Fisher arrives independently as a corporate witness with additional evidence. Mr. Yates waits in the hallway outside the conference room. Sherman sat at the far end of the table. Dagmar took notes on her own laptop. I listened, watching the ceiling fan turn slow circles. Then I stood. "I'm going in," I said. The room went quiet. Gregory stopped mid-sentence. Dagmar looked up from her laptop. Sherman set down his coffee. "Mr. Fisher," Gregory said carefully, "your presence isn't strategically necessary. The evidence will speak for itself regardless of whether you're in the room. I know it's not necessary for the case," I said. "It's necessary for me. I need to look him in the face when this happens." Dagmar studied my expression. "Not for revenge," Nguyen, I said. "To close a door I should have closed years ago." Gregory made a note on his legal pad. "Understood. Then you'll enter with Mrs. Stanton as her technical consultant. That gives you legitimate presence without raising immediate questions. We finalize the remaining details, timing seating positions, who would speak when. By 4 o'clock, the plan was set. By 6, everyone had left. By 2 in the morning, I still hadn't slept. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, staring at a photograph on the nightstand. Derek, at age 8, standing beside the first well we'd drilled together outside Tucson. His face was covered in reddish dust, grinning like he'd won the World Series, small hammer clutched in one hand like a trophy. I remembered that afternoon. 6 hours of drilling in August heat, the kind of heat that makes you question every life choice that brought you to the desert. Then water had erupted from the limestone formation, shooting 3 feet into the air before settling into a steady flow. Derek had jumped and shouted, "Dad, we found water! Can we drill another one tomorrow?" He'd fallen asleep in the truck on the drive home, hammer still in his hand, dust still on his face, exhausted and proud. The hardest part of watching your children grow up isn't that they change. It's that you can never pinpoint the exact moment they stopped being the person you thought you knew. And by the time you notice, the transformation is already complete and irreversible. "When did you stop being that kid?" I whispered to the photo. "Was it gradual, or was there one moment I missed?" The 8-year-old in the photo grinned back, frozen in dust and innocence. I could forgive losing the money. I could forgive the forged signatures and the mortgaged barn. I could even forgive the desert abandonment in some abstract, distant way. What I couldn't forgive was the loss of the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck after work because he'd helped all day and was proud of it. The boy who thought finding water was the greatest achievement possible. The boy who looked at me like I knew everything worth knowing. That boy was gone. Had been gone for years, probably. I just hadn't wanted to see it. At 4 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and walked to the front porch with cold coffee I didn't drink. The Arizona sky was cloudless and packed with stars, thousands of them more visible here than anywhere near a city. The kind of night Linda used to point at and say, "Starry sky means clear day tomorrow, Warren. No clouds to hide behind." I stood there looking at the same desert that had almost killed me 3 months ago. Now it was just landscape again, beautiful in its own harsh way, indifferent to human drama. Tomorrow I would walk into that conference room and watch my son's world collapse. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I enjoyed seeing him suffer, but because some doors need to close before you can move forward. We carry the dead with us into every difficult moment, not as ghosts or memories, but as the parts of ourselves they shaped when they were alive, the wisdom they planted, that blooms years later when we need it most. Linda would tell me I was doing the right thing. Sherman would say I was doing the necessary thing. Dagmar would say I was doing the only thing. Maybe they were all the same. The stars began fading as pre-dawn light touched the eastern horizon, turning the sky from black to deep purple to pale blue. Somewhere in Phoenix, my son was probably sleeping in expensive sheets in the house I'd helped him buy, preparing for the pitch that would secure his future. He had no idea what was coming. I went inside, showered, and stood in front of my closet, looking at the navy suit I'd worn to Linda's funeral 6 years ago and hadn't touched since. It still fit, though the shoulders felt tighter than I remembered. At 6:30 Friday morning, I was dressed and waiting on the porch when Sherman pulled up in his old pickup truck. Dagmar arrived at 7:15 in a black SUV with tinted windows, dressed in a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. We didn't say much on the drive to Phoenix. Sherman drove. Dagmar sat in the passenger seat, reviewing notes on her tablet. I sat in the back, watching the desert roll past through the window. Some silences hold more than conversation ever could. By 9:45 a.m., we were standing outside a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of the Hyatt Regency Phoenix, and I was running out of time to change my mind. The glass conference room doors opened with a mechanical whisper. Air conditioning hitting my face, scent of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. 20 investors in tailored suits turned toward us, and there at the front, beside a projection screen showing a rotating 3D model of a water filtration valve, stood my son. Derek saw me. For exactly 2 seconds, he froze. His expression went completely blank. Not shock, not anger, just absolute stillness, while his brain processed the impossibility of my presence. Then training took over. He recovered, forced his features into neutral professionalism, and turned his attention back to the projection screen as if nothing had happened. The investors hadn't noticed. They were still settling into their seats, reviewing printed materials, pouring coffee from the catered breakfast spread along the side wall. A man in his mid-30s with dark hair and an engineer's practical demeanor stepped forward. Kevin Morales, according to the name tag on his chest, Derek's business partner and co-founder. He extended his hand to Dagmar with professional warmth. "Kevin Morales, VP of Operations," he said. "Welcome to Brooks Solar Ventures. You must be Mrs. Stanton from Stanton Water Resources." I am," Dagmar confirmed. "And this is my technical consultant, Warren Brooks." She'd used my middle name. Smart. Let Derek wonder if the resemblance was coincidence. Kevin shook my hand without recognition, then gestured toward the back row. "Please take any seat. We're just about to begin." Dagmar and I walked to the rear of the conference room and sat in leather chairs that probably cost more than my first car. The long mahogany table stretched before us, investors on both sides, mostly Arizona agribusiness venture capitalists, based on the conversations I overheard, plus 2 from California who kept checking their phones. Dagmar's hand briefly touched my wrist under the table. Grounding gesture. I nodded slightly. Kevin Morales returned to the front and began welcome remarks. Derek stood beside him, hands clasped professionally, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what yet. "Thank you all for joining us this morning," Kevin said. "As you know, Brooks Solar Ventures has developed proprietary water filtration technology specifically designed for large-scale agricultural operations. My partner Derek Fisher will walk you through the technical specifications, market analysis, and revenue projections." Derek stepped forward, took a breath, began. His voice was steady after the initial shake. "The first 10 minutes covered technical overview, water filtration, chemistry, efficiency metrics, comparative analysis against existing commercial systems." He spoke with genuine command of the material, explaining complex engineering concepts in language investors could understand. I recognized some of the foundational ideas. We'd discussed them 15 years ago on the ranch porch, sketching concepts on yellow legal pads, while Linda brought us iced tea and told us we were both crazy for working in the heat. But this wasn't stolen. This was real understanding. Derek had taken those early concepts and refined them, developed them, turned theoretical discussion into actual innovation. He moved into market analysis. $780 million addressable market across 7 western states. He said, pulling up a map showing commercial livestock operations. Current solutions are inefficient, expensive, and environmentally problematic. Our technology reduces water waste by 40%, while cutting operational costs by 30%. Investors leaned forward. One made notes. Another asked a clarifying question about scale implementation. Derek answered with precision and confidence. Revenue projections appeared on screen. Break even in 18 months. 12 million annual revenue by year 3 based on conservative adoption rates. An investor laughed at one of Derek's data jokes, warm, genuine sound. I remembered Derek at 16 presenting his first science fair project on desert water conservation, getting the same laugh from judges. Linda had squeezed my hand. "That's our boy," she'd whispered. I felt something unwanted rising in my chest. Pride. Grief. The terrible recognition of what could have been. Dagmar noticed my expression. She wrote on her notepad, "You okay?" I nodded. But I wasn't okay. I was watching the son I'd hoped Derek could become talented, articulate, genuinely brilliant, and realizing he'd always had this capacity. He didn't need to steal. He could have succeeded legitimately, which somehow made the betrayal worse. We could have built this together. Derek reached his final slide. Contact information. Company logo. Questions. The room erupted in polite applause. Investors clearly impressed. Kevin Morales beamed with the pride of someone who'd bet his career on this project and was watching it pay off. Then Derek's eyes found mine across the room. First direct eye contact since I'd entered. His expression carried a question I could read without words. "Are you proud of me now? After everything, after the theft, the forgery, the desert, did you see what I built? Does it matter?" And the horrible truth was, a small part of me was proud. The part that had taught him to read topographical maps at age 10. The part that had spent summers drilling wells together, talking about water tables and limestone formations, and how to find aquifers in impossible terrain. That part of me looked at the presentation and thought my son did this. 15 years ago, Derek and I had sat on the ranch porch sketching water filtration concepts on a yellow legal pad. "We could do this together, Dad," he'd said. I'd put my arm around his shoulders. "Someday, son, when you're ready." I'd never imagined someday would look like this. The eye contact held for 3 seconds. Whole terrible history between us compressed into that moment. Kevin Morales broke the silence. "We'll now take questions from our prospective partners." A woman in her 50s from the Scottsdale contingent raised her hand, Rachel Drummond, according to her name card. "I'd like to start," she said. I glanced at Dagmar. She nodded slightly. The signal. Derek returned his attention to Rachel Drummond, but his hands were shaking now. He knew. Somehow he knew something was coming. "What differentiates your filtration technology from existing agricultural water solutions?" Rachel asked. Derek opened his mouth to answer. Dagmar's finger hovered over her laptop touchpad. In 5 seconds, she'd project the evidence bank statements, forged signatures forensic accountant's report, onto that screen behind my son. I had 5 seconds to decide if I really wanted to burn down everything in front of 20 witnesses. 5 seconds to decide if the son I'd just seen talented, articulate, capable, deserved one last chance to confess. Dagmar looked at me. I nodded. Her finger moved toward the touchpad. The bank representative from First Arizona stood, but not to applaud. His expression was the one I'd seen on livestock buyers when they spotted a lame horse. Thomas Garrett, early 40s, with precise movements and the careful demeanor of someone who'd reviewed too many bad investments, addressed Derek directly. Skukikuum. Mr. Fisher, can you confirm the origin of the $640,000 transferred to Brooks Solar Ventures LLC in March 2022? The conference room went quiet. Investors stopped reviewing their materials. Kevin Morales looked confused. Derek recovered quickly. That was a family investment, he said smoothly. My father agreed to support the company during our initial development phase. Standard angel investment from a family member. Yeah, your father is present, Thomas Garrett asked, scanning the room. I stood. 20 heads turned toward me in the back row. I didn't agree, I said. My voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. That was my retirement money. I wasn't informed of any transfer. The shift in the room was immediate. Investors' expressions moved from polite interest to sharp alarm. Rachel Drummond set down her pen. Two venture capitalists from California exchanged glances. Derek's face went pale. Dad, that's not we discussed this. We didn't, I said. You forged authorization for that transfer. A man I hadn't noticed before. Gregory Fletcher, my attorney brought specifically for exactly this moment, stood from his seat beside Dagmar. He opened his laptop and connected to the conference room's projection system. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with professional calm, I represent Warren Fisher. I'd like to present documentation that's relevant to your investment decision. The projection screen behind Derek flickered, then filled with images. First, two versions of a power of attorney document side by side. The left showed the original. The right showed alterations highlighted in red metadata timestamps, proving the file had been modified 11 days after Warren's signature date. Second, office security footage. Black and white time-stamped 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Derek sitting alone at his desk opening a file editing saving. The timestamp matched the metadata exactly. Third, Warren's signature samples. 20 authentic signatures from 40 years of documents, all showing consistent pen pressure, stroke angle, and structure. Then the mortgage signature, different pressure, different angle, and small brackets around the capital letters that Warren Fisher had never used in his entire life. Fourth, a summary showing two other investors' names redacted, but amounts visible. Similar patterns, similar signature irregularities, similar unauthorized transfers. These documents show a pattern of financial fraud spanning 18 months, Gregory said quietly. Forensic handwriting analysis confirms signature forgery. Digital forensics confirm post-signature document alteration. This isn't a family dispute. This is systematic fraud. The silence in that room wasn't empty. It was full of calculations, risk assessments, people mentally reviewing their own due diligence failures. Kevin Morales turned to Derek, his face drained of color. What the hell is this, Derek? This is, Derek started, then looked at me. Dad, we can settle this privately. This doesn't need to be. It's already public, I said. An investor from Phoenix closed his folder. Another pulled out her phone, probably texting her legal team. Thomas Garrett made notes with the mechanical precision of someone documenting everything for the inevitable lawsuit. Then the conference room door opened. Opal Fisher walked in. She was 36, dressed in a charcoal business suit, carrying a USB drive in one hand and a manila folder in the other. Derek's wife and the chief financial officer of Brooks Solar Ventures. She didn't look at her husband. Walked straight to Thomas Garrett's table and placed both items in front of him. I am the CFO of this company, she said, voice steady despite visible tension. These are all internal communications regarding fund transfers and document alterations, emails, metadata backup files from our server that my husband didn't know were automatically archived. Opal, Derek's voice broke. Don't do this. She finally turned to look at him. Derek, I begged you to tell the truth last month. You didn't. You chose this. You're my wife, he said desperately. I'm also an officer of a corporation that just committed securities fraud, she said quietly. And I'm not going to prison for you. Thomas Garrett opened the folder, began scanning documents. His expression shifted from professional caution to grim confirmation. Investors began gathering their belongings. Not frantically, that would have been unprofessional, but deliberately, quietly. The sound of laptop cases closing, folders being collected, chairs pushed back with careful control. My son's business died in 11 minutes. 42 years of fatherhood, 11 minutes of truth. Rachel Drummond stood, walked to the front of the room, placed her business card on the table, not in front of Derek, but turned so it faced the back of the room. Faced me. She held my eyes for 3 seconds, then walked out. One by one, other investors did the same. Left cards on the table. Some nodded to Dagmar. None spoke to Derek. Kevin Morales stood frozen beside the projection screen, staring at the evidence still displayed behind him, trying to process that his business partner had destroyed everything they'd built. Thomas Garrett was the last to stand. He didn't ask another question, just closed his laptop with a quiet click that sounded like a vault door shutting. He picked up Opal's USB drive. Mrs. Fisher, would you be willing to provide testimony to federal investigators? Yes, Opal said without hesitation. Thomas nodded, placed his own business card on the table beside the others, then walked out, already pulling out his phone to make the call that would start the formal investigation. The conference room was nearly empty now. Harsh fluorescent lighting, abandoned coffee cups, business cards arranged in a line on the mahogany table, all facing me, not Derek. Morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated dust motes in the air, and the projection screen still showing forged signatures behind my son. The scrape of 20 chairs pushed back at once sounded like something breaking, which it was. Investors left quickly, efficiently, without drama. Just footsteps on carpet, closing doors, the mechanical ding of elevator arrivals. Business conversations about other meetings, other investments, other opportunities that didn't involve federal fraud investigations. Within 3 minutes, the conference room was empty except for the people who couldn't leave yet. Business cards lay scattered across the mahogany table, all facing the back row where I'd sat. All facing me, not Derek. Rachel Drummond's on top. Thomas Garrett's beside it. Others I hadn't caught the names of, but their interest was clear. They wanted the legitimate technology, not the fraudulent company. Derek stood alone at the front of the conference room beside the projection screen that still showed his forged signature. The morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows made the room feel exposed, harsh. Nowhere to hide. I stood slowly. My knees reminded me of 68 years and too many days working in desert heat. Walked toward my son, stopped 1 meter away. The room smelled like abandoned coffee and expensive failure. Derek's voice broke. We can... No, I said. He looked at me like I'd struck him. Please, I can explain. I agreed. To federal investigators, to your attorney, to the judge, but not to me. There's nothing you can explain to me that changes what you did. I didn't want to, he started. You planned it, I said, cutting him off. 15 years of planning if we count back to when I told you about Dagmar's acquisition offer and you started calculating. 8 months minimum if we count from the dinner with the notary. 3 weeks if we only count from when you changed the barn locks. You planned all of it. Derek's face went through several expressions: denial, anger, desperation, defeat. Settled on something that might have been grief. Like, you didn't think I'd survive? I finished. You thought the desert would take care of me before I could figure out what you'd done. You were wrong. My son looked smaller somehow. Though he hadn't shrunk, the room had just grown to match the size of what he'd done. You surprised me, Derek. I said quietly, no anger in my voice, because anger felt too small for this moment. I didn't know you could go this far. I know now. Dad, please. There's nothing left to explain, I said. I turned and walked toward the door where Dagmar waited. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. I'd seen everything I needed to see. Dagmar held the door open. I walked through into the hallway, carpeted quiet, lined with abstract art that cost more than most people's cars. The elevator bank was 50 feet away. We'd made it 30 feet when I heard footsteps behind us. Wait, Derek called. Dagmar and I stopped, turned. Derek stood in the hallway looking between us with an expression of dawning realization. He focused on Dagmar. You're the person my dad refused to sell ranch land to 15 years ago, he said, voice carrying accusation and confusion in equal measure. The water company executive who made the offer. I thought you wouldn't help him because of that rejection. I thought you'd let him. He couldn't finish the sentence. Dagmar's expression didn't change. You thought wrong. But you lost millions when he turned you down. Derek pressed as if understanding this would somehow make his plan make sense. You could have expanded your territory. He rejected you. I made a business offer, Dagmar said calmly. Your father declined. That's how professional transactions work. I respected his decision then. I still do. So why help him now? Derek asked, genuinely confused. Because leaving someone to die in the desert isn't business, Dagmar said. That's cruelty. I can tell the difference. I looked at my son, this 38-year-old man I'd raised, taught, loved, trusted, and saw the fundamental gap in his understanding of human nature. He'd built his entire plan on a miscalculation about professional resentment overriding basic decency. Son, I said quietly, you used my trust to take my money. Mrs. Fletcher used her money to save me. That's the difference between you two. That's the difference between business competition and betrayal. One I can respect, the other I can't forgive. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, had nothing to say. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Dagmar and I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the lobby. The last image I had of my son standing alone in a hotel hallway, expensive suit, devastated expression, everything he'd built collapsing around him. The elevator doors closed like curtains at the end of a play nobody enjoyed. Dagmar and I rode down in silence. 14 floors. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say that hadn't been said? The elevator had mirrors on 3 walls, the kind designed to make small spaces feel larger. I caught my reflection and barely recognized the man looking back, a 68-year-old in a navy suit that had seen better decades. Thinning gray hair, weathered face with lines earned from 40 years of desert work. Unremarkable in every way, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without noticing, without remembering, without giving a second thought. But for the first time in 8 months, I looked like myself again. Not the man who'd been left to die in the desert. Not the victim of elaborate fraud. Not the father mourning the son he'd thought he knew. Just myself, Warren Fisher. A man who'd built wells, raised a family, lost a wife, survived betrayal, and was still standing. The ranch might be gone. The money was gone. The relationship with my son was gone. But I'd gotten something back that mattered more than any of it. I'd gotten the right to look in a mirror and recognize the person looking back. What I'd gotten back was time to heal. Time to figure out what came next. Linda's apple tree was bearing fruit for the first time in 3 years. Small, hard things that wouldn't be sweet until October if the birds left them alone that long. She'd planted it 20 years ago, said every tree deserves time to figure out what it's supposed to be. August in Arizona brought milder heat. The temperature had dropped to a reasonable 90 degrees, and the ranch looked the way it had before. Everything fell apart, just older, quieter, waiting to see what I'd do with it now that it was truly mine again. I was standing on the front porch where Linda used to shell peas when my phone rang. Gregory Fletcher. "Mr. Fisher," he said without preamble. "I have the final civil outcomes." I sat down in the chair Linda used to occupy. "Go ahead." "The ranch mortgage is canceled," he said. "Forensic analysis confirmed the signature was forged. The bank has no legal claim on your property. The lien is released effective immediately." I looked out at 240 acres of desert and limestone that my grandfather had homesteaded. My father had expanded, and I'd nearly lost to my son's greed. Second, Gregory continued, "We recovered $580,000 of the $640 from your retirement accounts. $60,000 was spent on legitimate project expenses before we could freeze the accounts. That portion is non-recoverable." "Most of it then," I said. "Not all, but most." Third, the power of attorney is completely revoked. No one has financial authority over your accounts except you." I thanked him and hung up. Sat there for another 20 minutes watching clouds move across the sky, trying to feel something about the numbers. Relief, maybe. Satisfaction. But what I mostly felt was tired. Justice is like irrigation. It reaches most of the field, but there are always dry patches you learn to live with. That evening, Sherman Yates pulled up in his old pickup truck with a load of fence wire I'd ordered 2 months ago and forgotten about. He was 71, weathered from decades of cattle ranching, and had been my friend for 30 years, long enough to know when to talk and when to just hand over supplies and wait. We unloaded the wire near the barn in companionable silence. Then Sherman looked at the ranch house, the barn, the land stretching toward the horizon. "60 grand, he said. "That what you lost, that can't come back." "Yeah," I confirmed. "What do you think about that?" he asked. I turned the question back on him. "What do you think?" Sherman pulled out a bandana-wiped sweat from his forehead. "I think $60,000 is the price for the costliest lesson you ever learned. Cheaper than some alternatives." "Like what?" "Like losing the whole ranch," he said. "Like dying in that desert. Like never finding out who your son really was and trusting him with even more. 60 grand is a lot of money. But it's not everything. You still got the land. Still got yourself. That's more than a lot of people walk away with." We stood there watching the sun set over the Sonoran Desert, the same desert that had almost killed me 3 months ago, now just landscape again. Beautiful in its harsh way, indifferent to human drama. "Yeah," I said finally. "I guess it is." Sherman clapped me on the shoulder and drove away. I went inside, made dinner I didn't taste, and tried not to think about how quiet the house was. November came with cooler temperatures and the kind of clear blue sky that makes you forget Arizona ever gets hot. I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when Gregory called again. "Your son accepted a plea agreement," he said. "He'll plead guilty to wire fraud and elder financial exploitation. Sentencing is up to the judge. Federal sentencing guidelines suggest 18 months to 3 years. Restitution is included in the agreement." I set down my coffee cup. "When formal sentencing hearing is scheduled for January, he'll likely surrender to federal custody immediately after. And Opal..." "Completely cleared," Gregory said. "Her cooperation and the evidence she provided confirmed she had no knowledge of the fraud before you were abandoned." The U.S. Attorney's Office found no basis for charges. I thought about my daughter-in-law walking into that conference room alone, choosing truth over marriage, knowing it would end everything. Good, I said. Gregory gave me a few more details about the civil restitution process, the timeline for recovering the $60,000 if Derek ever had assets again, which seemed unlikely, and the formal dissolution of the power of attorney filing. When he hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Chapter closed, I thought. But the book stays on the shelf. What do you do with a son's phone number after he's stolen your life savings and pleaded guilty to a federal crime? I pulled out my phone, opened contacts, scrolled to the eyes. Derek Fisher Mobile, last called March 2022. Back when I'd still believed his excitement about the solar business was something we could share. Back when I'd thought he was visiting because he cared not, because he was calculating how much he could take. My thumb hovered over the screen. The option was there, delete contact. One press and his number would disappear. Clean break. Final severing of the last digital thread connecting us. I stared at his name for 3 full minutes. Then I closed the Contacts app without deleting it. I didn't know if I'd ever call that number again. Didn't know if I'd ever want to hear his voice, see his face, have a conversation that didn't include lawyers and evidence and federal crimes. But I also didn't know if keeping the number meant I was hoping for something, reconciliation, apology, explanation, closure, or if I just wasn't ready to make that particular decision yet. Maybe both. I set the phone on the counter and looked out the kitchen window at Linda's apple tree. The fruit had ripened. Still small, still hard, but starting to show color. Give it another month, and they might actually be worth eating. The fluorescent lights in Gregory Fletcher's conference room made everyone look pale, but Derek looked genuinely sick. He sat across the table from me with his hands folded, shoulders hunched, nothing like the confident son I remembered, or the desperate criminal I'd discovered. His attorney sat beside him, briefcase closed, clearly there only as witness. "Thank you for coming," Gregory said to me. "Your son requested this meeting. You were under no obligation to accept." I looked at Derek. His eyes were red-rimmed. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. The entry twist hit me harder than I expected. This was the man who had forged my signature, stolen my retirement, mortgaged my ranch, and left me to die in the desert. And he looked genuinely broken. "Go ahead," I said. "I'm sorry for everything," Derek said. "The money, the forgery, the lies, all of it." He paused, swallowed hard. "But mostly I'm sorry about the desert." The room went quiet. Gregory shifted in his seat. Derek's attorney stared at the table. "What about the desert?" I asked. "I didn't think you'd—" Derek started again. "I thought you'd be found in time before—" He couldn't finish. His face crumpled. "I told myself you'd flag someone down, that you'd be okay. But I knew. Deep down, I knew what I was doing. I sat there feeling nothing and everything at once. Rage, grief, exhaustion. Relief that he'd finally admitted it. I think about it every night," Derek continued. "You out there alone, wondering if I was coming back, realizing I wasn't." Tears ran down his face. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Part of me wanted to reach across the table. Part of me wanted to walk out. I did neither. "I accept your apology," I said finally. Derek looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "But forgiveness and trust are 2 different things," I continued. "I can forgive you for being desperate, for making terrible choices, for letting greed turn you into someone I don't recognize. That's forgiveness. Trust is something else. Trust is believing you won't do it again. Trust is letting you close enough to hurt me. And that, Derek, I cannot give you." The hope in his eyes died. He nodded slowly. "I understand. Maybe someday." I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. But not today. Not for a long time. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Gregory cleared his throat. I think that's all we needed, he said gently. Derek stood, wiped his face. Thank you for coming, he said. I know I don't deserve it. I watched him leave with his attorney. The door clicked shut. Gregory poured me water from a carafe on the table. That took courage, he said. Both of you. I drank the water and wondered if forgiveness and trust really were two different things, or if I was just protecting myself from more pain. 3 days later, Sherman Yates pulled up to Fisher Ranch in his Lincoln with Dagmar riding shotgun. They climbed out carrying a folder that Sherman held like it contained nuclear codes. Got your patent valuation, Sherman announced, grinning like a cat with a canary. We gathered in my kitchen. Dagmar set down a basket of homemade stolen. Pre-Christmas delivery, she said, smiling. Sherman opened the folder with theatrical flair. Your dual-casing flow regulator patent is valued by 3 independent industrial appraisers, low estimate $2.1 million, high estimate $2.8 million. I stared at the number, read it again. Million. Sherman confirmed. Turns out every major drilling contractor in the Southwest wants licensing rights. You've been sitting on a gold mine while living on Social Security. Dagmar laughed, a bright sound that filled the kitchen. Warren, you've been rich this whole time and didn't know it. Here's the ironic part, Sherman said, leaning back in his chair. Derek mortgaged the barn, the equipment, the land, everything he could see and touch. But he never looked at the patent paperwork. Never realized the real fortune wasn't in the property. It was in your head. The pattern interrupt hit me like cold water. My son had stolen from the wrong vault. He took $640,000 from your retirement. Sherman continued. Mortgaged the ranch for $1.8 million. All that risk, all that fraud, all that destruction, and he completely missed the asset worth more than both combined. I thought about Derek in that conference room, broken and apologetic. He destroyed our relationship and his own future for money that represented barely a quarter of what he could have earned legitimately if he just asked about the patent, if he just worked with me instead of against me. What do I do with this? I asked, holding the valuation report. License it, Sherman said immediately. 3 contractors already reached out expressing interest after I made some quiet inquiries. You could clear $400,000 in the first year alone, then royalties indefinitely. Dagmar touched my arm. You could rebuild everything he tried to take, she said softly. Sherman stood stretched. I'm going to step outside, he announced. Check on something in the truck. He looked at Dagmar, then at me, then winked. You two have business to discuss. It was the least subtle exit I'd ever witnessed, and the business he was referring to had nothing to do with patents or licensing deals. Dagmar watched him go, shaking her head with amusement. Subtle as a freight train, that one. Always has been, I agreed. She turned to me, her expression shifting to something more serious. How are you really doing? After the meeting with Derek, I considered the question. I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me feels lighter. Part of me feels heavier. That sounds about right for forgiveness, she said. We stood there in my kitchen, with winter light streaming through the windows, the patent valuation on the table between us, worth more than everything my son had tried to steal, and Sherman Yates outside making himself scarce with all the subtlety of a winking conspiracy. Well, he's not wrong, you know, Dagmar said quietly. We do have things to discuss. The exit twist settled over me like a warm blanket. My son had stolen my money and tried to steal my life, but he'd missed the patent, missed the real value, and somehow, in the wreckage of everything he'd destroyed, new possibilities were emerging that I'd never imagined. Outside, Sherman leaned against his Lincoln, grinning at the sky, clearly in no hurry to interrupt whatever conversation he thought was about to happen. Arizona winter mornings have a particular clarity. 18 degrees Celsius sky, so blue it looks painted, and the kind of clean light that makes you believe in second chances. I stood in the small Tucson office of the Desert Well Foundation, breathing in the smell of fresh paint and possibility. 3 desks, file cabinets still mostly empty, a potted desert willow in the corner that Dagmar had insisted would bring life to the space. She sat at the desk nearest the window, organizing intake forms. Sherman occupied the 3rd desk, technically retired, but showing up anyway, because that's what Sherman did. The things Dagmar and I needed to discuss that December afternoon had led to this, a nonprofit dedicated to helping Arizona seniors defrauded by family members. The entry twist had arrived quietly, like most transformations do. I'd survived my son's betrayal only to discover I could help others survive theirs. Dagmar had the legal expertise, I had the painful experience, and together we'd built something neither of us could have managed alone. The door chimed. A man walked in, shoulders hunched, carrying himself like he was trying to take up less space in the world. 71 years old, I guessed, with the weathered hands of someone who'd worked with them his whole life. He wore clean jeans and a button-down shirt, the kind of careful presentation people make when they're ashamed and trying not to show it. "Mr. Hayes," I asked, standing. He nodded. "Robert Hayes. I called yesterday about—" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "About my situation." "Please sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "You just found out this morning." This morning," Robert confirmed, sitting carefully. "Bank sent a late payment notice for a mortgage I never signed." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, hands shaking slightly. "House has been paid off for 12 years. I built equity my whole working life. And now, I recognized everything about him. The disbelief, the confusion, the shame that comes from being betrayed by blood. Tell me from the beginning," I said. "Take your time." Robert Hayes was a retired welder, worked 38 years for the same fabrication company in Tucson. Raised 3 kids alone after his wife died young. His youngest daughter, Christine, had offered to help him set up online banking last spring. He'd given her his documents, his social security number, his trust. "Or she was supposed to make it easier for me to pay bills," Robert said, staring at his hands. "I thought she was helping." Instead, Christine had forged his signature, mortgaged his paid-off house for $340,000, and disappeared. The bank found the paperwork legitimate. Robert found himself owing money on a home he'd finished paying for before his daughter turned 30. I listened the way Dagmar had listened to me 6 months ago, in that Sonoran Desert Visitor Center, unhurried, uninterrupted, without pity or judgment. Just steady presence while someone's world collapsed in careful, halting sentences. Listening to someone's pain is like holding a cracked cup. You have to be steady or it spills everywhere. "I gave her everything," Robert continued. "Paid for her college even though I couldn't afford it. Helped with her down payment when she bought her first place. And he stopped, swallowed. "How do you do that to someone who raised you?" I knew exactly that voice. The one that asks how. The one that blames itself for loving someone who didn't deserve it. The one that tries to make sense of senselessness. Across the room, Dagmar looked up from her files, caught my eye. She'd heard this story before. Different details, same devastation. She'd heard it from me first. "Mr. Hayes," I said quietly. "Did you have any warning, any sign she was planning this?" "None," he said. "She called me every Sunday, brought her kids to visit, seemed normal right up until she vanished." He looked at me directly for the first time. "That's what makes it so hard." She looked me in the eye and lied. "For months, I thought about Derek at the Hyatt Regency pitch meeting, confident and composed while presenting a venture built on stolen money. I thought about him in Gregory Fletcher's conference room, broken and apologizing. Both versions were real. Both versions were my son. "We can help," I said. "First step is getting you connected with a forensic accountant who specializes in elder financial exploitation. Then an attorney. We've got relationships with people who do this work well." Robert nodded slowly. "Can you get my house back?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But we can fight. And you won't fight alone." We talked for another 20 minutes about next steps, documentation, timelines. Dagmar joined us, explaining the legal process with the same clear patience she'd shown me. Sherman pulled contact information for the accountant. We'd vetted a sharp woman named Patricia Voss, who'd worked 3 cases like this already. When we finished, Robert stood, shook my hand. "Thank you," he said. Then quieter. "I thought I was the only fool dumb enough to be tricked by my own kid." I stopped him, shook my head. "You're not foolish, Mr. Hayes. You were trusting." He looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. "Is there a difference? When did trusting the people we love become something we need to apologize for?" I glanced at Dagmar across the room, then back at Robert. "Big difference," I said. "Foolish means you ignored warnings. Trusting means you believed in someone's better nature. That's not a character flaw, it's what makes us human." The exit twist crystallized in those 2 words. I'd spent months thinking I was stupid for not seeing Derek's betrayal coming. But I wasn't stupid. I was a father who believed his son was better than he turned out to be. That wasn't weakness. That was love. Robert Hayes left with Dagmar's business card and something that looked almost like hope. I watched him walk to his truck, 71 years old, shoulders a little straighter than when he'd arrived. Sherman appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. "You're good at this, Warren." I looked around the small office. Desert willow in the corner, its branches bare but alive. File cabinets waiting to be filled with stories like mine, like Robert's. Outside, January sunlight painted everything clean. I had a good teacher, I said, looking at Dagmar. She smiled, understanding exactly who I meant. Sherman's truck pulled up at 7:30 Saturday morning, and he was carrying a white bakery box from Titus Bakery, the same place Derek had bought donuts 8 months ago, to set the mood before asking me to sign papers. I watched from the kitchen window as he climbed out, morning light catching the white cardboard. My chest tightened. I'd told Sherman about that breakfast, about how Derek had used pastries and small talk to soften me up before sliding the power of attorney across the table. Sherman came through the door without knocking, the way he'd done for 20 years. He set the box on the kitchen table and looked at me. "Read the label first," he said quietly. I opened the box. Apple fritters. Chocolate Long Johns. And in the center, wrapped separately, a cinnamon roll with cream cheese frosting. "Linda's favorite," I said, my voice catching. "And I know," Sherman said. The entry twist settled over me like a blanket. This wasn't about vigilance against deception. Sherman wasn't testing me or teaching me to be suspicious. He was honoring Linda, remembering the woman who'd loved cinnamon rolls from Titus Bakery every Saturday morning for 32 years. The ritual Derek had weaponized Sherman was reclaiming as tribute. I poured coffee. Sherman took the apple fritter. I took the cinnamon roll bit. Into it tasted sweetness and memory, and the strange alchemy of grief transforming into something softer. "Foundation's doing good work," Sherman said, sipping his coffee. "Robert Hayes called me yesterday. Said you're helping him build a case." "Dagmar's doing most of the heavy lifting," I said. "I just listen." "That's not a small thing," Sherman replied. Listening. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind built over decades. Through the kitchen window, the Sonoran Desert stretched toward the horizon, scrub brush and saguaro catching early light. Same desert that had tried to kill me. Same land Derek had mortgaged without permission. Same ranch I'd almost lost. My phone rang. Dagmar's name on the screen. Sherman nodded. "Pick it up, Warren," I answered. "Good morning, Dagmar." "Good morning," she said, her voice warm even through the phone. "I know it's your day off, but I just got a call from another potential client. 73-year-old woman in Mesa grandson forged her name on a reverse mortgage. I told her we'd call Monday, but I wanted you to know." "Thank you," I said. "We'll take care of her." "I know we will," Dagmar said. There was a pause, comfortable and full. "Are you doing okay this morning?" "I'm good," I said and meant it. Sherman brought breakfast. "Of course he did," she laughed. "I'll let you two enjoy. See you Monday." "See you Monday." I hung up. Sherman was grinning at his coffee mug. "She's good for you," he said simply. I know," I replied. I refilled my mug, walked to the front porch. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, familiar and solid. Morning air was cool, maybe 15 degrees Celsius, carrying the clean smell of creosote and dust. The desert stretched in the same direction, where I'd been abandoned 6 months ago, but it looked different now. January light painted it soft, pinkish orange instead of the scorching red-white of July. The desert changes color depending on the season and your relationship to it. In July, it wanted me dead. In January, it just wanted to exist alongside me. I sipped my coffee and thought about everything that had happened since that July morning. Derek forging my signature. The power of attorney I'd signed without reading. $640,000 stolen from my retirement. The ranch mortgaged for $1.8 million. Being driven into the desert and left to die with a broken cell phone and half a bottle of water. I thought about Dagmar finding me, Gregory Fletcher building the case, the Hyatt Regency conference room where I'd watched my son's world collapse, the plea deal, the apology in the attorney's office, the patent valuation that revealed Derek had stolen from the wrong vault entirely. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this morning. Standing on my own porch, coffee in hand, Sherman in my kitchen. Dagmar's voice still warm in my ear, the Desert Well Foundation helping people like Robert Hayes who thought they were alone in their shame. What was lost money, though, most of it recovered. Trust in my son probably forever. The simple belief that family means safety. What was saved the ranch? My dignity. My life literally and figuratively. What was gained purpose? Community. The foundation. Dagmar, whatever that relationship was becoming. The knowledge that I could survive the worst betrayal imaginable and still find reasons to get up in the morning. Linda would have liked Dagmar. That mattered more than I'd expected it to. What is revenge really? Except proving you can still live your own life. The exit twist arrived not as revelation, but as quiet certainty. I'd thought the greatest revenge was watching Derek fall apart in that conference room, his investors walking out, his venture collapsing, his crimes exposed. But that wasn't it. The greatest revenge was this, standing here free, coffee in my hand. Entire day stretched out before me, belonging only to me. Choices that were mine to make. A life I controlled. Derek had tried to take everything. He'd forged documents, stolen money, mortgaged property, and driven me into the desert to eliminate me as an obstacle. He'd calculated that I'd die out there, that the heat and dehydration would solve his problem cleanly, but he'd miscalculated. He'd missed the patent worth more than everything he stole. He'd underestimated my ability to survive. And most importantly, he'd failed to understand that the only thing that truly mattered couldn't be forged, or stolen, or mortgaged. Autonomy. The right to live on my own terms. The freedom to choose how I spent my remaining days and who I spent them with. Behind me, Sherman moved around in the kitchen, probably cutting another apple fritter. In Tucson, Dagmar was likely organizing case files for Monday. In Mesa, a 73-year-old woman was discovering she wasn't alone. Somewhere Derek was serving his sentence, learning that shortcuts cost more than the long road. And here on my front porch, I stood watching January light turn the desert gentle. My son took my money, left me in the desert to eliminate me. But he couldn't take the one thing that mattered most, the autonomy to live my remaining days on my own terms. This January morning, with coffee and dessert stretched out before me, I finally understand that is the only thing ever truly mine, and no one can take it unless I hand it over myself. And to you listening to my story, remember this autonomy is the only thing truly yours, and no one can take it unless you hand it over yourself. I trusted my son because I loved him. I signed documents without reading them because I believed family meant safety. This isn't one of those typical dad's revenge stories, it's a warning. Don't make my mistake. Trust doesn't mean abandoning vigilance. I learned this lesson at 68 years old, alone in the desert. You don't have to learn it the same way. Real family justice isn't about watching someone fall. It's about standing back up yourself and choosing what comes next. I believe God put me through this to show others that survival is possible, that betrayal doesn't define you, and that purpose can grow from pain. Family justice means reclaiming your autonomy, not destroying theirs. The Desert Well Foundation exists because I refuse to let cruelty win. That's what separates genuine family justice from mere vengeance. One rebuilds, the other just burns. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about dad's revenge stories like this, or share your own thoughts on family justice. And if you'd like more stories like this, please subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. I truly appreciate your time and your presence here. One last reminder, while this story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes, the message about autonomy, forgiveness, and rebuilding is real. May you never face betrayal like this, but if you do, may you find the strength I found.